Hey loves, welcome back to Mantho K-Drama Love Stories.
The silence in the first-class carriage of the KTX train from Busan to Seoul was so complete that Ndeshipanda Amidhila could hear the precise rhythm of her own heartbeat. It was a sound she had grown accustomed to during her 3 years in South Korea, the steady thump that reminded her she was alive, that she existed in this country where everything from the language to the social codes felt like a puzzle she was still learning to solve. The train had departed Busan at 6:47 p.m., and by 7:15, the other passengers in first class had created an invisible barrier around seat 2A. It was fascinating to watch, really. The way businessmen who had been confidently striding through the platform moments before suddenly developed an urgent need to check their phones, to rearrange their luggage, to find literally any other seat in the carriage when they saw who was already seated in that specific spot. Ndeshi, as she preferred to be called, having grown tired of watching Korean tongues stumble over the full length of her name, observed this phenomenon with the detached curiosity of the environmental researcher she was. She had spent 5 years studying human behavior in relation to ecological systems, and the patterns in this carriage were as clear as any dataset she had ever analyzed. Predator in the vicinity. Prey species exhibit avoidance behaviors. Territory marking evident. The predator in question was a man who seemed to have been carved from shadow and silence. He sat in seat 2A, the one with the most legroom and the best view of the carriage entrance, a strategic position that spoke of someone who needed to see threats before they saw him. His buzz fade was so precisely maintained that it looked like it had been done with a laser rather than clippers. The beard that framed his jaw was equally meticulous, a dark forest of carefully groomed hair that somehow managed to look both sophisticated and dangerous. A single bead of sweat traveled down the back of Ndeshi's neck as she watched him. The air conditioning in the carriage was working perfectly, but there was something about this man that made the temperature feel like it had risen several degrees. His left arm, resting on the armrest, was a canvas of intricate black ink. The sleeve tattoo disappeared beneath the crisp white fabric of his shirt, but what was visible was mesmerizing. A complex pattern of geometric shapes and what appeared to be a traditional Korean tiger, its eyes gleaming with an almost supernatural intensity. Ndeshi had seen tattoos before, of course. Her own people practiced traditional scarification, patterns carved into skin that told stories of lineage and belonging. But this was different. This was art that screamed power. The man had not moved in the 12 minutes since Ndeshi had entered the carriage. He simply sat there, one leg crossed over the other, a tablet in his hands that he appeared to be reading. But Ndeshi noticed that his eyes weren't moving across the screen. They were fixed on the reflection in the window, watching the carriage behind him with the patience of a snake waiting for its prey to make a mistake. Every other seat in first class had been taken by now. Every seat except the one directly across from him. Seat 2B. The Korean businessman who had been walking toward it had frozen mid-stride, his face draining of color as he realized what he was about to do. He had mumbled something about forgetting his luggage and fled back toward the standard class cars. A young couple had approached next, the woman whispering urgently to her partner, her eyes wide with recognition. The man had grabbed her arm and pulled her away so quickly that she nearly tripped over her own feet. The elderly gentleman with the walking stick had taken one look at seat 2B, then at the man in 2A, and had simply turned around and walked back the way he came, his dignity intact but his survival instincts clearly functioning perfectly. Ndeshi had been standing near the entrance to the carriage, watching this theatrical display of fear with growing amusement. She was 28 years old, a child of the Namibian desert and the American Pacific Northwest, and she had never been particularly good at recognizing danger when she saw it. Or perhaps she recognized it perfectly well and simply refused to let it dictate her choices. The Namibian in her, the part that came from her mother's people, the Avambo tribe with their long history of resilience and resistance, told her that fear was a gift given to prey animals, and she was no one's prey. The Oregonian in her, the part that had grown up in Portland with its eccentric coffee shops and bookstores and people who believed that everyone deserved a chance, told her that this was just a man. A handsome man, certainly. A terrifying man, apparently. But still just a man who occupied one seat on a train. The environmental researcher in her, the part that had spent years measuring the impact of human activity on delicate ecosystems, told her that this was a data point. A social phenomenon worth observing up close. And so Ndeshi Amidhila, who had never learned to back down from anything in her life, walked toward Seat 2B with the measured stride of someone who had crossed the Kalahari Desert and survived, who had navigated the bureaucratic nightmare of Korean immigration and thrived, who had chosen to study the most endangered ecosystems on the planet because she believed that even the most broken things could be healed. She was aware of the collective intake of breath from the other passengers as she approached. She could feel their eyes on her back, their silent prayers that she would come to her senses and turn around. She could practically hear the thoughts racing through their heads. Does she not know who that is? Is she insane? Is she trying to get herself killed? Ndeshi reached Seat 2B and stopped. The man in 2A finally looked up from his tablet. And for the first time, Ndeshi understood why everyone had been so afraid. His eyes were the color of aged whiskey, warm and golden. But there was nothing warm about the way they looked at her. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, done too much, and had stopped being surprised by any of it. They were assessing her, cataloging her, determining whether she was a threat or a fool or something else entirely. She met his gaze without flinching. Her mother had taught her that you look a predator in the eyes, that you show them you are not prey, that you stand your ground even when every instinct screams at you to run. "Excuse me," Ndeshi said in her careful Korean, the language still feeling foreign on her tongue despite 3 years of practice. "Is this seat taken?" The silence that followed was so profound that she could hear the faint hum of the train's engine beneath her feet. The man's expression didn't change. He simply stared at her, his perfectly shaped beard doing nothing to soften the sharp angles of his face. He was beautiful in the way that a storm was beautiful, magnificent and terrible and capable of destroying everything in its path. He was probably in his mid-30s. His skin was flawless, a warm olive tone that looked like it had never been touched by the sun despite the fact that he clearly spent time outdoors. His nose was straight and aristocratic, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, his lips full and unsmiling. Ndeshi had been in Korea long enough to understand the local standards of beauty. She knew that this man was considered devastatingly handsome, the kind of handsome that made women forget their own names and men forget their own pride. She also knew that he was dangerous, the kind of dangerous that didn't need to prove itself because it had already proven itself too many times to count. "I asked if this seat is taken," she repeated, switching to English. Her accent was a peculiar blend of American and Namibian, the words rolling off her tongue with a rhythm that seemed to confuse Korean ears. "I can see that it's empty, but I've noticed that everyone seems to think it belongs to someone." His eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. It was the only indication that she had surprised him. "Most people know better than to sit there," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. His English was impeccable, nearly accentless, with just the faintest hint of something that might have been British. "The seat is not taken, but perhaps you should reconsider." "Perhaps I should," Ndeshi agreed, setting her duffel bag on the floor beside the seat. "But I've been standing for quite a while, and my feet are tired, so I think I'll sit." She dropped into the seat across from him with the casual grace of someone who had no idea they were sitting across from a predator. The other passengers in the carriage had gone completely still. Ndeshi could feel their eyes on her, could practically hear their thoughts. "She's going to die. She's going to die, and we're going to watch it happen." But the man in 2A simply watched her with those whiskey-colored eyes, his expression unreadable. "Ndeshapanda Amidhila," he said, and her blood ran cold. "How do you know my name?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. "I know everyone who sits in this seat," he said, his lips curving into something that was almost a smile but not quite. "I know everything about them, where they're from, what they do, why they're on this train. Most people don't realize I'm watching. But you walked right up to me and asked if the seat was taken. You forced me to acknowledge your presence. So I had no choice but to find out who you are." Ndeshi felt the first stirrings of unease in her stomach. It wasn't fear, she refused to call it that, but it was something like caution, a warning signal from the part of her brain that had evolved to recognize threats. "Environmental researcher," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Ua Women's University, studying the impact of urbanization on the Han River ecosystem." "Yes, I know all of that," the man continued. "I know that you were born in Oregon but spent your childhood summers in Namibia with your grandmother, who taught you everything about traditional Avambo healing practices. I know that you came to Korea 3 years ago because you won a prestigious research fellowship, and I know that you've been trying to get funding for a project that would reintroduce native plant species to the riverbanks, but have been repeatedly denied because your research doesn't align with the government's development goals. Ndeshi stared at him, her mouth slightly open. How could he know all of this? She had barely told anyone about her grandmother, about the summers in the Namibian desert, about the plants her grandmother had shown her that could heal everything from fever to snakebite to broken hearts. She had mentioned it once, in passing, to her research assistant, a young Korean woman named Jisoo who had seemed genuinely interested in the cultural aspect of her work. I have a question, Ndeshi said, recovering her composure. Did Jisoo tell you all of this? Or do you have your own personal surveillance team following me around? Something flickered in those whiskey eyes. Surprise? Respect? She couldn't tell. Both, he admitted. Jisoo was my woman. She told me everything I needed to know about the foreign researcher who was making waves at the university. And yes, I have people who follow interesting people. Your woman, Ndeshi repeated, her voice dripping with disgust. Did she have a name, or was that her official title? She had a name, the man said, his voice flat. But she also had a weakness for money, and I have plenty of that. We had an arrangement. She provided information, and I provided her with the lifestyle she wanted. It was simple. Simple, Ndeshi echoed. Right? Because nothing says simple like selling information about your colleagues to a man who clearly isn't a businessman, despite the expensive suit. The man looked down at his shirt, then back at her. What makes you think I'm not a businessman? The tattoos, Ndeshi said flatly. The fear on everyone's faces. The fact that you called yourself my woman. These are not things that indicate a legitimate career. He was quiet for a moment, and then he did something that surprised her. He laughed. It was a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, and it transformed his entire face. The coldness in his eyes softened. The hard lines of his mouth curved into something almost human, and for just a moment, he looked like a normal man. A handsome man, certainly, but a normal one. Kang Do-hyun, he said, extending his right hand across the table between them. The tattoos on his fingers were intricate, black ink that seemed to writhe in the fading light of the setting sun. Go-eun-woo, he said, I apologize for being in your seat. I know that this particular spot is reserved for you, and I've interrupted your journey. Nobody forced you to sit here, Ndeshi said, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. The only reason people avoid this seat is because they're afraid of you. But you're not afraid of me? Why would I be afraid of you? She countered, her voice steady. I'm not afraid of bullies. Bullies? Go-eun-woo repeated, and Ndeshi could hear the amusement in his voice. Is that what you think I am? A bully? I think you're a man who has cultivated a reputation for being dangerous, Ndeshi said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I think you enjoy the fear in people's eyes when they see you, and I think you have surrounded yourself with people who are willing to do terrible things just to be close to you. I don't know what the people in this country call you. I've heard whispers of mafia and shadows and hidden kings, but I don't know what the truth is. But whatever you are, you're not a bully. A bully would have thrown me off this train by now. A bully would have made me regret sitting here. You haven't done that. Go-eun-woo was silent for a long moment, and Ndeshi watched the emotions play across his face. Surprise, curiosity, and something that might have been respect. You're interesting, he said finally. I haven't met anyone like you before. I'm sure you say that to all the women who sit across from you on trains, Ndeshi said dryly. I'm sure there are more than I'd like to imagine. Not really, Go-eun-woo said. Most women don't sit across from me on trains. Most people don't do a lot of things around me, actually. I've gotten used to it. Doesn't that bother you? Ndeshi asked, and she was genuinely curious. Doesn't it bother you that people are terrified of you? It used to, he admitted, his voice softening just slightly. When I was younger, I wanted people to like me. I wanted them to see me as someone worth knowing. But I learned quickly that there are only two ways to make people see you that way. You can either be someone they look up to, or you can be someone they fear. And being looked up to requires a lot of work. So you just gave up and decided to be feared instead? Something like that, he said, and there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. something that made Ndeshi feel like she was seeing a crack in the armor he had built around himself. The train passed through a tunnel, and for a moment, there was only darkness. Ndeshi could feel the weight of Go Eunwoo's gaze on her, could feel the tension in the air between them. Not fear, exactly, but something electric and charged. When the light returned, he was still looking at her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking about how strange this is," Ndeshi admitted. "I'm sitting on a train, across from a man who basically admitted he's a crime lord, and we're talking about fear and vulnerability like we're old friends." "Who said I was a crime lord?" "The tattoos," Ndeshi said. "The fact that you have people following me. The fact that everyone on this train is terrified of you. It doesn't exactly scream humanitarian work." "Maybe I'm a secret humanitarian," he said, and Ndeshi could hear the smile in his voice. "Maybe I'm just pretending to be a crime lord, so that people will leave me alone." "Are you?" "No," he admitted, his voice dropping. "I'm exactly what you think I am." The train pulled into a station, and Ndeshi watched as several passengers scurried past them, their eyes fixed on the floor, their pace quickening to get away. "Seoul is getting closer," Go Eunwoo said. "Do you have someone waiting for you?" "I didn't tell anyone I was coming back," Ndeshi said. "I like to be alone when I travel." "That's funny," he said. "The environmental researcher who studies the impact of humans on ecosystems prefers to be alone." "Alone is different from lonely," Ndeshi said. "I've never been lonely. I have my work, and I have my grandmother, even though she's thousands of miles away. I have my memories of the desert and the ocean and the people who taught me what it means to be alive. I don't need to be surrounded by people to feel whole." Go Eunwoo said nothing for a long moment. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said. "What? Tell me about her. What did she teach you?" Ndeshi blinked, genuinely surprised by the question. No one had ever asked her that before. Not her colleagues, not her friends in Korea, not even Jisoo, who had seemed so interested in her cultural background. "She taught me about the plants," Ndeshi said slowly, unsure why she was opening up to this stranger. "About the ones that could heal and the ones that could harm. She taught me about the spirits that live in the trees and the rivers, and how we have to be careful not to offend them. She taught me that the world is alive, that everything is connected, that we are just one part of a larger whole." "That sounds like a good thing to know," Go Eunwoo said. "It is," Ndeshi agreed. "It's the only thing that's ever made sense to me. The idea that we're all connected, that we all matter, that everything we do has a ripple effect that we can't even begin to understand. It keeps me humble." "Humility," Go Eunwoo said, and the word came out slowly, as if he was tasting it for the first time. "That's a word I haven't heard in a long time." The train began to slow, and Ndeshi realized with a start that they had arrived in Seoul. "So this is where we say goodbye," she said, standing up and grabbing her duffel bag. "Will I see you again?" Go Eunwoo asked, and Ndeshi heard something in his voice that she couldn't quite identify. "I hope not," she said honestly. "No offense, but I don't think someone like me belongs in your world." "Someone like you?" "Someone who believes that everything is connected," Ndeshi said. "Someone who believes in healing and connection. Your world, Go Eunwoo, is about control and fear. Those things don't belong together." He stood up, and Ndeshi realized that he was impossibly tall, at least 6 feet, and that his presence filled the space around them with something dark and magnetic. "Maybe they belong together more than you think," he said, his voice so soft that only she could hear it. "Maybe healing and control are not as different as you imagine." The train doors slid open, and Ndeshi stepped out into the Seoul night, and for just a moment, she felt his gaze on her back, warm and assessing, and she knew that this was not the last time she would see Go Eunwoo. The morning after the train ride found Ndeshi Amidhila in her cramped office-tel in Hongdae, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince herself that the previous night had been a dream. The room smelled like her grandmother's herbs, a blend of dried marula leaves and morina powder that she kept in small cloth pouches hanging from the window. The window itself was open, and the sounds of Hongdae, the distant thump of music from the clubs below, the laughter of students walking home from the bars, the occasional shout of someone who had had too much soju, floated in like whispers from another world. Hongdae was a student neighborhood, chaotic and vibrant and alive in ways that the rest of Seoul sometimes wasn't. The streets were always crowded, the cafes always full, the nightlife always loud. It was the kind of place that Ndeshi had found comfort in when she first arrived in Korea, a place where she could blend in with the chaos, where her dark skin and foreign features were just part of the tapestry of diversity. But this morning, the familiar sounds of Hongdae didn't bring her comfort. This morning, she was thinking about Go Eun-woo. She had tried not to. She had taken the subway back to her apartment, showered in water so hot it turned her skin red, and climbed into bed with a cup of tea made from the last of her grandmother's herbs. She had tried to read, tried to meditate, tried to convince herself that the strange man on the train was just a memory, a strange encounter that would fade with time. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Ndeshi sat up in bed, her long braids falling over her shoulders like a curtain of dark rope. The morning light was just beginning to creep through the window, casting pale yellow shadows across the small room. Her grandmother's herbs rustled in the breeze, and for a moment, she felt like she was back in the desert, surrounded by the sounds and smells of home. But she wasn't home. She was in Korea, a country that had embraced her and rejected her in equal measure, where she was always the foreigner, always the woman who didn't quite belong. And now she had caught the attention of a man who was either a crime lord or something worse. "Get it together, Ndeshi," she muttered to herself, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. "You're a researcher. You're logical. You don't believe in coincidences, and you certainly don't believe that one strange encounter on a train means anything." But as she stood up and walked toward her small kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The kitchen was barely more than a corner of the main room, with a single burner stove and a small refrigerator that hummed loudly when the temperature dropped below a certain level. Ndeshi opened the fridge and stared at the contents. A carton of eggs, a bag of kimchi, some vegetables that were starting to wilt, and tried to decide what to eat. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up, expecting a message from her research assistant or perhaps one of her colleagues at UA. Instead, she saw an unknown number with a Korean area code. "Good morning, Ndeshi. I hope you slept well. GEW." Ndeshi stared at the message, her heart pounding in her chest. How had he gotten her number? She hadn't given it to him. She hadn't even told him her full name, though he had already known it. And she certainly hadn't given him any indication that she wanted to hear from him again. She typed out a response, her fingers trembling slightly. "How did you get this number?" The response came almost immediately. "You'd be surprised what I can get." Ndeshi set the phone down, her mind racing. She had known, of course, that the man on the train was dangerous. She had known that he had access to information that he shouldn't have. But knowing something and experiencing it were two very different things. She turned to look at the door of her apartment, and for just a moment, she thought she saw the shadow of a person standing on the other side. But when she blinked, it was gone. "Get it together, Ndeshi," she said again, this time more sharply. "You're being paranoid. He's just a man. He's just a man who happens to have a lot of resources and absolutely no respect for boundaries." The phone buzzed again. "I'd like to see you again. Today. For lunch." Ndeshi shook her head, a grim smile tugging at her lips. She typed out her response. "I have work. And even if I didn't, I don't think that's a good idea. What do you have to fear? I'm not afraid of you. I just don't have time for games." "Who said anything about games? I want to talk about the environment." Ndeshi snorted, but she couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. "You want to talk about the environment? The man who probably owns half the construction companies in Seoul wants to talk about the environment? I own exactly a quarter of them. And yes, I do. I'm concerned about the river, right? I'm sure you are. I'm serious. I have a proposal for you." Ndeshi stared at the message, her curiosity getting the better of her. A proposal for what? Come to lunch and find out. She set the phone down, her mind spinning. She knew she shouldn't go. She knew that meeting with him again was a terrible idea, that it would only lead to more entanglement, more danger, more of everything she had been trying to avoid. But she also knew that she was curious. The environmental researcher in her wanted to know what proposal he could possibly have. The woman in her wanted to see him again, to figure out why he had such a hold on her, why she couldn't stop thinking about his whiskey-colored eyes and the way his lips had curved into that almost smile. And so, against every instinct she had, Ndeshi typed out her response. "Fine. Lunch. But I'm picking the restaurant. That works. I'll send a car at 12. No, I'll meet you there. Send me the address. Car is safer. I don't trust you enough to get in a car with you. There was a pause and then his response came through. I like that you don't trust me. Most people trust me too quickly. It's refreshing. I'm not most people. I've noticed. Ndeshi set the phone down and turned toward the mirror that hung on the back of her door. The woman who looked back at her was familiar and strange at the same time. Her skin was the color of warm caramel. Her eyes a dark brown that seemed to glow in the right light. Her face was broad and proud. Her cheekbones high. Her lips full and expressive. She wore her hair in long braids, a style that she had learned from her grandmother, and the braids fell around her face like a curtain of dark rope. She had always liked the way she looked. Her mother had taught her to love her features, to see them as a gift from her ancestors, a connection to the Namibian soil that had nourished her people for generations. And even now, in a country that sometimes made her feel like she didn't belong, she held on to that pride like a shield. But today, as she looked at her reflection, she saw something else. Something new. A spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A feeling of anticipation that she couldn't quite explain. She quickly dressed, choosing a pair of worn jeans and a simple black t-shirt, a far cry from the elaborate clothing she often saw in Korean fashion magazines. She needed to feel like herself today. She needed to feel like the woman who had sat across from a crime lord on a train and told him exactly what she thought of him. The restaurant she had chosen was a small place in Hongdae, a hole in the wall that served traditional Korean dishes and that she had discovered during her first month in the country. The owner was an elderly woman named Mrs. Park, who had taken a liking to the foreign researcher with the strange accent and had made it her personal mission to teach Ndeshi everything she needed to know about Korean cuisine. It was the kind of place that Go Eun-woo would never find on his own, the kind of place that was too small and too authentic for someone with his resources. And that, Ndeshi thought, was exactly the point. She arrived early, claiming a table in the corner where she could see the door. She ordered a pot of tea and waited, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. And then he walked in. It was like watching a storm roll in. The way the atmosphere in the restaurant changed the moment he stepped through the door. The light seemed to dim, the air grew heavy, and every person in the room turned to look at him. He was wearing a simple black turtleneck and dark jeans, clothing that would have been unremarkable on anyone else. But on him it was somehow menacing. The tattoos on his hands and neck were visible, the intricate patterns catching the light, and his beard was even more carefully groomed than it had been on the train. He had a presence, there was no denying that. A charisma that drew people in and held them captive, even as they tried to run away. Ndeshi watched him scan the room, watched his eyes land on her, and felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. He walked toward her table with the measured stride of someone who owned every room he entered. When he reached the table, he didn't sit down. Instead, he stood there, looking down at her with an expression that she couldn't quite read. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low and warm. "Don't thank me yet," Ndeshi said, gesturing for him to sit. "You haven't told me what this proposal is." He sat down across from her, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away, leaving them in a bubble of silence. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, "on the train, about connection, about how everything is connected." "That was a pretty general statement," Ndeshi said warily. "What about it?" "I realized that I've been living my life the wrong way," he said. "I've been focusing on control and power and fear. But none of those things have made me happy. You don't strike me as someone who wants to be happy." "I didn't think I did either," he admitted. "But then I met you." Ndeshi stared at him, unsure if he was joking. "I'm serious," he said, leaning forward. "You're the first person who ever looked at me like I was just a man. Not a monster, not a legend, not something to be feared. Just a man." "You're not just a man," Ndeshi said flatly. "You're a man who scares people. You're a man who has power and resources and probably a lot of people who want to kill you. I don't think you're a monster, but I also don't think you're just a man." "Fair enough," he said, a flicker of a smile on his lips. "But you didn't run away. You didn't cower. You talked to me like I was human." "Because you are human," Ndeshi said. Whatever you've done, whatever you are, you're still human. And humans are capable of change. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, he said. Change. Ndeshi raised an eyebrow. I have a proposal for you, he said. I want you to help me change. I want you to help me become someone who doesn't need to be feared. I'm not a therapist, Ndeshi said dryly. I'm an environmental researcher. I know, he said. That's why I want your help. You study ecosystems, right? You study how everything is connected. I want you to apply that to my life. I want you to show me how everything I do is connected to everything else. I want you to teach me what you know. You want me to teach you environmental science so you can become a better person? I want you to teach me how to care, he said simply. About people. About the world. About anything. I want to learn how to be someone who deserves to be alive. Ndeshi leaned back, studying him with narrowed eyes. That's a lot, she said finally. And I'm not sure I believe you. I don't expect you to believe me, he said. I know that trust has to be earned, but I'm willing to earn it. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And why me? Ndeshi asked. Why not find a therapist or a priest, or someone else who actually knows how to help people? Because you're the only person who made me want to try, he said. You're the only person who looked at me and saw something worth saving. Ndeshi shook her head slowly. You're a very strange man, Go-eun-woo, she said. I know, he said, and for a moment, his guard dropped, and she saw something almost vulnerable in his expression. I've been told that before. The waitress appeared, and Ndeshi ordered for both of them, not waiting for his input. She had a feeling that he wasn't the kind of man who was used to being told what to do, and she wanted to see how he would react. To her surprise, he didn't react at all. He just sat there, watching her with an expression of quiet fascination. You like having control, don't you? He asked. Everyone likes having control, Ndeshi said. Some people are just more honest about it. Fair enough, he said. I'll give you that. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the clinking of chopsticks and the distant noise of the restaurant around them. And then Ndeshi set down her chopsticks and looked at him directly. Tell me about yourself, she said. The real you, not the man who scares people, not the legend, not the myth. Tell me who you really are. He was silent for a moment, his hands wrapped around his teacup. I don't know if I can, he said honestly. I don't know if I remember who I really am. I've been playing a role for so long that I've forgotten what I was before. Try, Ndeshi said. Try for me. And so he did. He told her about his childhood, about the cruel father who had told him that he would never amount to anything, about the mother who had died when he was young, leaving him alone in a world that had never wanted him, about the men who had seen his potential and turned him into something he'd never wanted to be. He told her about the first man he had killed, a rival gang leader who had threatened his family. He told her about the guilt that had followed, the nights he couldn't sleep, the feeling of being trapped in a life that had been chosen for him. And as he talked, Ndeshi felt something shift in the air between them. This wasn't a monster sitting across from her. This was a man who had been shaped by circumstances, who had made choices that had led him down a dark path, but who had the potential to be something else. What do you want for the future? She asked. What do you want to be? He was quiet for a long moment. I want to be someone who can look at himself in the mirror without flinching, he said. I want to be someone who deserves the life I have. I want to be someone who matters, not because of what I can do to others, but because of what I can do for them. That's a good start, Ndeshi said. That's everything, he said. They sat in silence for a while longer, and then Go-eun-woo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small business card. Call me if you want to help me, he said, sliding it across the table. I know this isn't exactly what you signed up for when you came to Korea, but I think we could help each other. Ndeshi looked at the card, then at his face. I'll think about it, she said. All I ask is a chance, he said. As he walked out of the restaurant, Ndeshi stared at the business card in her hand. It was black, with silver lettering that read Go-eun-woo, followed by a phone number and an address. No title, no explanation, just a name and a number, and an invitation to change everything. 3 weeks had passed since the day Ndeshi had sat across from Go-eun-woo in Mrs. Park's restaurant. 3 weeks of avoiding her phone. 3 weeks of trying to convince herself that she didn't want to help him. 3 weeks of staring at his business card and wondering what it would be like to call. She had managed to distract herself with work. Her research on the Han River ecosystem had finally been approved by the university, and she was spending most of her days in the field, measuring water quality and documenting the species that still clung to life along the riverbanks. But at night, when the work was done and the silence of her apartment pressed in around her, she found herself thinking about him, about the vulnerability in his eyes when he had told her about his mother, about the way his voice had cracked when he talked about his father, about the plea in his voice when he had asked her to help him. It was absurd. She knew it was absurd. He was a crime lord. He had probably done terrible things, things she didn't want to know about. And yet, there was something about him that she couldn't shake. The thought of him was like a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. As she looked out her window, watching the rain begin to fall, she made a decision. She reached for her phone and called him. He answered on the first ring. "Hello." "Hi," Ndeshi said, her voice coming out more tentative than she wanted it to. "It's Ndeshi. From the train." "I know," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I've been waiting for your call. I'm not sure I want to do this," she admitted. "I'm not sure I want to get involved with someone like you. But you called anyway." "I did," she said. "I don't know why." "Maybe you're curious," he suggested. "Maybe you want to see if I'm actually capable of change." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that you're not worth the trouble." "And what did you conclude?" "I haven't concluded anything yet," she said. "That's why I called." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and she could hear his breathing, steady and measured. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her. "About connection. About how everything is connected." "That's very vague," she replied. "Let me show you," he said. "Let me show you what I've done. I'll open up my world to you completely, and you can decide for yourself whether I'm worth the effort." He sounded so earnest, so vulnerable, that Ndeshi felt her walls begin to crumble. "Fine," she said. "But we do it my way. Anything. Meet me at the university tomorrow," she said. "I want to show you something." She hung up before he could respond. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the rain having cleared during the night. Ndeshi arrived at Ua Women's University early, her research bag slung over her shoulder, her hair in its usual long braids. He was waiting for her outside the main gate, and she was struck again by how out of place he looked in this world of academia and learning. He was dressed in simple clothes, trying not to draw too much attention, but his presence was impossible to miss. He didn't say anything when he saw her, just fell into step beside her as she walked toward the campus. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To the river," she said. "I want to show you what happens when people stop caring." They walked in silence through the campus, past the old buildings and the students and the trees that were just beginning to change color. Ndeshi led him to a part of the campus that bordered the Han River, where she had spent months studying the damage that had been done to the ecosystem. "Look," she said, gesturing at the water. "Look at what we've done." He stood beside her, and she could feel him taking in the scene. "These are the things I study," she said. "The river used to be full of life. There were fish and plants and birds that nested along the banks. And now there's barely anything left. We've destroyed it." "Why?" he asked. "Why would people do this?" "Because it was easier," Ndeshi said. "Because it was more profitable. Because no one wanted to think about the consequences." "Is that what you want to teach me?" he asked. "About consequences?" "Yes," she said. "I want to teach you that everything has a consequence. Every choice, every action, every moment of ignoring what matters because it's easier. I want to help you see what I see." They stood in silence, looking at the river, and she felt the weight of his gaze on her. He had a presence, there was no denying it. But there was also a softness now that hadn't been there before. "Show me more," he said. So she did. She took him to the research center, where she showed him the data she had collected about the river's decline. She took him to her small office tel, where she showed him the herbs her grandmother had taught her to use. She even took him to a community garden that she had helped create, where volunteers were working to grow plants that could survive in the polluted soil. He listened, really listened, and she saw something shift in him each time she spoke. Why? She asked him one evening, after they had spent a day together. Why do you care so much? Most people in your position wouldn't give a damn about any of this. He was quiet for a moment. Because of you, he admitted. Because you care. And I want to be someone you can care about too. It was like a punch to the gut. Go-un-woo, she said, her voice catching in her throat. You can't just say things like that. I know, he said, but I'm not very good at pretending. When I feel something, it shows. And I feel a lot for you. Then he reached out and took her hand. Just for a moment. But it was enough. This isn't right, Deshi whispered. You're dangerous. And I'm nothing. You're everything, he said. You're the only thing that's made sense in my life in a very long time. She pulled her hand away, forcing herself to take a step back. Please don't, she said. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to push, but I don't want to pretend I don't feel what I feel. I've been pretending my whole life. I don't want to pretend with you. Fine, Deshi said. Then let's be honest. What do you want from me? Everything, he said. I want everything. She stared at him, feeling the force of his words like a physical blow. That's a lot, she said finally. I know, he said. I'm not asking for it all at once. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to be something better. A chance to be with you. Why me? She asked again. He shook his head slowly. I don't know, he admitted. I've never felt this way about anyone before. There's just something about you that makes me want to be a better man. I'm not special, she said. There are plenty of women who could help you. Maybe, he said, but none of them are you. He stepped forward and took her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. She felt the warmth of his palm against hers and felt her resolve begin to crack. This is a bad idea, she whispered. I know, he said, but I've never been good at good ideas. She laughed despite herself, then looked at him with something that might have been hope. Fine, she said. I'll help you, but you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you'll try, she said. Really try. Not for me, but for yourself. I don't want to be the reason you change. I want you to change because you want to be better. That's the only reason I would change, he said. They stood there, hands clasped together, and the world seemed to fade away. And then Deshi remembered her grandmother's words, spoken to her so many years ago. When you meet someone who makes you want to be better, hold on to them. They are the rarest gift the universe can give you. She looked at Go-un-woo, this broken, dangerous, vulnerable man, and she knew that she had found that rare gift. Okay, she said. I'll help you. For the first time, he smiled. Months passed, and Deshi watched Go-un-woo change. It was subtle at first, the way he started looking at people differently, asking them how they were feeling, showing interest in their lives. He began to reach out to his family, trying to rebuild the bridges he had burned. He started to care about something beyond his empire. And through it all, Deshi was there, guiding him, supporting him, pushing him to be better. Have you thought about what you want to do? She asked him one night, as they sat in his penthouse apartment, looking out over the Seoul skyline. I don't know, he admitted. I've been so focused on being better that I haven't thought about what I want to do. I know I want to leave this life, but I don't know how to become something else. He was more relaxed now, more comfortable in his own skin. The tattoos on his neck and hands were still visible, but he'd started wearing long sleeves to cover them up when he went out in public. His hair was growing out, the buzz fade no longer as sharp as it once was. Maybe we should think about it together, Deshi said. Maybe you don't have to figure it out alone. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were soft. He reached out and cupped her cheek in his hand. I've been thinking about something, he said, his voice low and intense. Something important. What? She asked, her voice catching slightly. I've been thinking about Namibia, he said. About the places you told me about. The desert, the ocean, the villages where your grandmother lived. I want to see it. I want to see the world that shaped you. It's a long way from Korea, she whispered. I know, he said, But I want to go with you. She was speechless. I want to see the places you love, he said. I want to meet your grandmother. I want to understand where you come from, so I can understand who you are. Are you serious? She asked. More serious than I've ever been about anything, he said. For the first time, Deshi allowed herself to hope. What are you saying? She asked, needing to hear the words from his lips. I'm saying I love you, he said. I've loved you since the moment you sat down across from me on that train. I love everything about you. Your strength, your sarcasm, your wit, your heart. I love the way you see the world, the way you see me. I love you, Ndeshi, and I don't want to spend another moment pretending I don't. The world shifted around her. I love you too, she finally managed. His arms wrapped around her, and she felt the strength in his embrace. I want to give you everything, he said. I want to give you the moon and the stars. I want to give you a life that you'll never regret. I want to be the man who deserves you. You already are, she said. You're the man you always should have been. You just needed to find your way. I found my way to you, he said. That's all that matters. The weeks that followed were the most beautiful days of Ndeshi's life. Go Eunwoo stepped away from his business, leaving it in the hands of trusted associates who shared his new vision. He started a foundation focused on environmental restoration, pouring his resources into the very cause that Ndeshi had dedicated her life to. He showed her that he was serious about change, about redemption, about building something that would outlast him. They made plans to travel to Namibia together. He showed genuine interest in learning about her culture, her traditions, the beliefs that her grandmother had passed down to her. He listened with rapt attention when she spoke about her ancestors and their connection to the land. And through it all, Ndeshi fell more deeply in love with him. He was still the man she had met on the train, intense, magnetic, commanding. But now there was a softness to him, a vulnerability that he showed only to her. He had shed the armor that had protected him for so long, and what remained was the man who had always been hiding beneath the surface. One night, as they sat in his penthouse, looking out over the city that had once been his kingdom, he turned to her with a question. Will you marry me? He asked. Ndeshi's eyes widened. I know it's soon, he said. I know there's so much we still need to figure out, but I know what I want. I want you, Ndeshi. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to fall asleep next to you every night. I want to build a life with you. Go Eunwoo, she said, her voice trembling. Say yes, he said. Say yes and let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you. Her eyes filled with tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. His arms wrapped around her, and she could feel the shaking in his body, the release of tension and fear and hope. I love you, he whispered. I love you so much. I love you too, she said. I always have. The wedding was small and intimate, held in a traditional Korean hanok that Ndeshi had fallen in love with during her time in Seoul. Her grandmother had flown in from Namibia, her face weathered and wise, her eyes filled with joy as she watched her granddaughter marry the man who had captured her heart. Go Eunwoo's few remaining family members came as well, wary and uncertain at first, but gradually warming to the woman who had changed their son's life. Go Eunwoo looked at her with such love, such tenderness, that Ndeshi felt her heart swell with emotion. You're beautiful, he said to her. So are you, she said. The ceremony was simple, but it was perfect. After the wedding, they traveled to Namibia, just as they had planned. Ndeshi showed him the desert where her ancestors had walked, the villages where her grandmother had been born, the ocean that she had loved since she was a child. She introduced him to her family, who welcomed him with open arms, seeing in him the man she had described to them. He was different there, more relaxed, more open. He seemed to shed the last of his old skin, becoming the man he had always been meant to be. This place is beautiful, he said, standing beside her as they watched the sunset over the desert. I understand now why you love it so much. Home is a feeling more than a place, she said. But this place feels like home. Then let's make it our home, he said. Let's build a life here. You can continue your research and I can find something meaningful to do. We can create something that matters. Are you serious? She asked. More serious than I've ever been, he said. I'm not the same man I was, Ndeshi. I don't need the power and control I used to crave. I just need you. I need to be with you. The rest doesn't matter. She looked at him, this broken man who had found his way to healing, and she knew that she had found her home. It's going to be difficult, she said. Leaving Korea, starting over. We'll have to work for it. I'm not afraid of work, he said. And I'm not afraid of change. I'm only afraid of losing you. You'll never lose me, she said. I'm yours, Go Eun-woo. And I'm yours, he said. Forever. The sun dipped below the horizon, and they stood together, watching the colors of the desert sky shift and change. And in that moment, Ndeshi knew that she had found what she had been looking for all along. Not power, not fame, not success, but something much rarer. A man who had been lost and found his way. A man who had been broken and learned to heal. A man who had loved her enough to change, who had trusted her enough to become something more. And she had been there for every step of the journey, the woman who had sat across from a crime lord on a train and told him exactly what she thought of him. The woman who had changed his life. The woman who had found her home in the most unexpected place.
Hey love, this story teaches us that the true power isn't in making people fear you. It's in having courage to change for someone who sees your worth. He was a monster until he met a woman who looked past his reputation and saw his humanity. Ndeshi didn't change him, she showed him that he could change himself. The bravest thing you can ever do is let someone see you completely. And the most powerful thing you can ever offer is to see someone else the same way. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like and subscribe.